Hello, hello, hello. This will be my project on legalizing prostitution, and it'll be the case for it, or at least the case to start talking about it. Now, there's one key premise we need to get out of the way for the rest of the video to make sense, which is this underlying belief that the government does not have the moral authority to stop me from doing things that don't hurt anyone else. Basically, as long as I pose no threat to other people, and the only person who I could hurt is myself, then it's okay for me to do those things. This sort of belief is called philosophical anarchism. And this just follows the logic from Martha Rundell, who says decisions between consenting adults made in private is no place for the government to tread. As long as you're not hurting anyone else and people are consenting to do whatever you're doing, then it's okay. The government shouldn't be involved. And I would say that this applies to things like prostitution. With this being said, let's go ahead and talk about the case for prostitution. Starting out with how it saves the taxpayer money, it allows for safety for prostitutes, and allows for individual freedom or agency. So let's start at the top, with saving taxpayer money. Freakonomics published how in San Francisco, if they were to decriminalize prostitution, they would save $11 million per year because the police wouldn't have to track down and arrest prostitutes just to release them. It's important to know that if it was legalized, law enforcement could address more pressing matters, like terrorism. But it's not only that. Think about how there's individuals that are literally costing you, the individual taxpayer, thousands of your taxpayer dollars just to bring them into jail to release them. But now let's go ahead and talk about the second portion, which is the safety for prostitutes. Now, if you would recall, back in history, when porn was illegal in the United States, there was a lot of violence against the people who were acting in porn because they had no way to legally protect themselves. They had no way to check out the people who they were going to be acting for and working for to make sure that those were good people. Well, Belle Knox, a famous American porn star, recently wrote an informative op-ed for Rolling Stone where she talked about how the same thing happened in prostitution with what happened in the porn industry, where the prostitutes aren't able to have these sort of background checks, and they aren't able to make sure that the people they're going to be working for are good, because it simply isn't open source enough because of how underground the market is. If you legalized it, it allows for the market to go above ground and for there to be more information on the working conditions for those prostitutes. It's important to note that a majority of the violence that comes with sex work and that comes with prostitution is simply because it's illegal. The prostitutes aren't able to report things because if they do, they get arrested. And that's the big problem, is that, like I was just talking about, because it's such an underground market, there's no way for people to bring bad things that are underground above ground to report them. But when we look to Germany and New Zealand, where they legalized sex work, we saw that the violence against the sex workers decreased. But not only that, there was no increase in sexually transmitted diseases because there was more open source when it came to prostitutes and their sort of records and what diseases they could potentially have and not have, because nothing was pushed underground. But not only that, if you look to what happened in 1980, where Rhode Island accidentally legalized prostitution because they got rid of some definitions, we saw that one really, really good thing happened, which was that the amount of reported rapes declined by 31%. That alone is a really, really important reason for why we should go ahead and legalize or at least decriminalize prostitution. But let's go ahead and get into one of the most important points for why we should go ahead and legalize prostitution, which is that of individual freedom. Now, a common argument people bring up for why we shouldn't have prostitution is that purchasing sex by having prostitutes, you're buying bodies and you're using peoples as means. But a really common and intuitive answer to this is that that's no more true than buying massages from someone is. When you buy a massage from someone, you're sort of buying their body for a temporary amount of time. The only difference is the body parts that are being used. And this is where I say it's wrong to go ahead and legalize the use of some body parts in a consenting trade. One person gives capital and another person gives a service. It's not okay to legalize, say, using your hands but not using other body parts. But let's go ahead and look into what Brian D. Earp wrote. Now, Earp brings up this important argument. He basically reifies Mohn's argument and applies it to prostitution by starting out by saying that the first of the two-part argument is that much of the harm that is associated with prostitution is actually a consequence of its being illegal and is therefore not inherent to the act of trading sex for money per se. But it doesn't stop there. He goes on to say that many lines of work have intrinsic harms, and yet rather than banning them, and making them illegal, we instead just pay those people more. So for example, an underwater welder has an extremely high fatality rate, but that doesn't mean that we get rid of underwater welders. We still need them. Rather, we pay them more. Instead of making the average starting wage of a welder of $40,000, you start out making $65,000 as a way to compensate. With this being said, let's go ahead and talk about the case against prostitution, starting out with the first one, which is that it increases human trafficking, and then going on to the second one, which is that it isn't moral. So Harvard University recently published this article, and they said, does legalized prostitution increase human trafficking? And in it, they say that there are 27 million victims worldwide trafficked for forced labor or commercial sex exploitation. And I'm not going to argue against that. That would be wrong. However, it's important to note that when we talk about legalizing prostitution, we aren't talking about supporting human trafficking or allowing it to grow. Rather, we're saying that we legalize people who want to sell their bodies, but we continue to have bans on human trafficking and sex trafficking. Just because you allow for one thing doesn't mean you allow for the other. I think Dan Dimitri makes a good point here when he says, well, let's say that there were still slaves who were picking cotton in the United States. If I was a northerner and I wanted to pay someone to pick cotton and they agreed consensually to work for me, surely that's not promoting slavery, right? And the answer is of course not. Now, the second reason people are against prostitution is because they say that it isn't moral. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. From the first, of course it's immoral. Like most things that are immoral, I don't really think it should be legislated. But that being said, sex outside of marriage, sex with a partner that is married outside the consent of their current partner, adultery, is immoral. Well, the good thing is that he recognizes that he shouldn't legislate his morality. I think that a really good response to this is that while you can have a sort of moral view on prostitution being good or bad, keep that in your household. Keep that to yourselves or to your local community, but don't force your morality onto others through law. That's not how we should decide what is right and what is wrong, what should send you to jail, and what should not. A really good example of this is that while smoking is legal, that definitely doesn't mean that everyone supports smoking. The next one reads, no woman should be seen as a slave. Prostitution is slavery for a woman. We have nothing to fear other than breaking the chains. If we do ban it entirely, we can train prostitutes for other jobs. Prostitution is holding back women. If we want to become equal, we must get rid of it. While it's fine for this person to think the way that they think, it's not okay for them to legislate their morality onto other people. In fact, feminists actually support legalizing prostitution because it says that if a woman wants to do something with her body, moreover, if anyone wants to do something with their body that relates to a sexual act, it should be up to them to decide what they do. It is their body, it's their choice. If they would like to do something, let them do it. Don't tell them how they can live their life. In fact, it would be anti-feminist for you to tell a woman that she cannot sell her body or provide a certain sexual service because you're telling her what she can and cannot do simply because she is a woman. Alright, we're on the last one, we're almost done, and it reads, prostitution is immoral. I think prostitution is immoral and a disgusting thing to do to your body. It is not the only thing and source of income that you can receive, and the people that do it are degrading themselves and their body by making themselves be a thing that you can buy. You should never allow yourself to be degraded like that. Well, okay, it's fine if you want to think that way, but if someone wants to degrade themselves, then let them degrade themselves. It's their life, let them choose what they would like to do with it. And also this common argument, which is that the ickiness involved in the jobs has to mean prostitutes. Well, what about janitors? What about people who literally just clean toilets? What about sewage maintenance? What about everyone who does dirty, dirty jobs? Do we just tell them that we should not let them do it and we should outlaw it because we don't like it and it makes us feel uncomfortable? No, that'd be ridiculous. At the end of the day, if someone wants to do something and it doesn't hurt anyone else, we should let them do it. Thank you. This is a notice that both sides are very important, and I hope after the end of this video, you now, if you ever run into a conversation about prostitution, know more of the talking points. Not biased, by the way. Have a good night. Thank you for watching.